To be here today in Istanbul, just for me to understand a bit of like the audience, who here is from like a startup or a fintech, okay, and the rest are from banks or I guess a mix. Okay, so we also have a small crowd, so we can also make it interactive. So feel free to kind of like jump in and ask any questions. So I'll talk to you in the next 30 minutes or so about Visa's approach to innovation, and specifically more how we're working with startups in Israel, but also in other innovation hubs across the world. But before that, I want to give you a bit of like some background to set the scene. So obviously the payments industry is going through a lot of changes, a lot of shifts. So if we look at the retail space, so transactions are now everywhere. So we've moved to a point where you would typically take your plastic card and pay at the physical retail space with a cashier, to a growing number of transactions in e-commerce, mobile transactions. And the next step is really what's happening with IoT. So more and more devices are getting connected. So it's not far-fetched to envision your connected printer, kind of like making a payment, inventing ordering ink when you run out, your connected fridge, making transactions, other connected appliances. So transactions have evolved to now kind of like be facilitated from all these IoT connected devices. So we're looking at 20 billion devices by 2020. So a lot of different types of commerce transaction which can take place now. The physical retail space. So I think many people thought that the physical retail space will be dying given again the growth of like e-commerce and electronic transactions, but we're actually seeing that retailers are now kind of like repositioning their physical space and creating it as a place, as an area where their customers, where their communities can meet and engage. So think of Apple, that they have like the Everyday at Apple or the Genius Bar. So what they do there is they bring their consumers, and they don't sell to them, right? They bring them to, they can hear lectures on how to like edit music, how to use technologies. So again, they turn their physical space into a meeting place for the communities, and we're seeing more and more retailers looking to kind of like create a similar type of experience. Everything gets connected, and I think that has different implications. So we're seeing kind of like retailers that are building like these digital fitting rooms, connecting data to the products, and then they can provide more personalized experience to their consumers. The proliferation of machine learning and AI, using smart assistants from Google, Amazon, and Apple to facilitate commerce, using data and connectivity. Looking at our engagement with the staff at the store. So typically when you would go to buy something, maybe you would ask someone from the store if something is missing. They would go back to the inventory. You would wait maybe for a minute, maybe 5 minutes until they get back. So a lot of friction in that kind of like engagement. Now staff basically, they have tablets, they have mobile phones, so they can provide a different type of engagement, more kind of like a conversational type of contextual experience for the consumers. If something is missing in the inventory, they can order it for you online. They can show you other stores. They may have like your purchase history, so again, provide a more personalized experience. So different type of shopping experience to consumers that is empowered which is done by empowering staff at the store. And finally, we can say that services will become differentiators. So whether it's ways how your product will be delivered to you, looking at how the checkout will be done, right? So we're all familiar with what Amazon did with Amazon Go. So we're seeing more and more retailers looking at kind of like future checkout experience. Will it be done with sensors, computer vision and cameras, RFID? There are different technologies that kind of like can help shape that future checkout experience, and we're seeing more and more retailers experimenting in that space. So those are the impacts that we're seeing in the retail landscape. Regulation is also kind of like driving, accelerating a lot of those changes. So if you heard about open banking and PSD2, essentially it means that banks would need to open their system. So third-party companies will be able to access their data of course with consumer consent, and also initiate payment. So that brings to the proliferation of platforms, so new players, new platforms which are offering alternative payment propositions. And since we now have sort of like a level playing field, so since like all parties have the access to the same data, so we're seeing players that are looking to differentiate by creating a improved user experience to consumer. And finally, we're seeing the fragmentation, which we can see very nicely in this slide here. So we're seeing all these new entrants which are looking to impact essentially every financial decision that we take throughout our lives. So we don't like to think about it, but we take a lot of decisions even on a daily basis. So whether it's ways that how we make payments, how we kind of like manage our budget throughout the month. How do I save to my pension? I see a lot of young people here, but people are thinking, how do I save like 30, 40 years from now? If I want to buy something big. So new players in the kind of like lending or what we call consumer credit, and also investing. So a lot of kind of like interesting fintechs which are playing into this space. And speaking of fintechs, Visa was actually the first fintech in history. So exactly 60 years ago, our founder, his name is D. Hawk. He actually came up with the idea of a payment card which allows you to pay everywhere you go, anytime you want. And that idea was not only innovative, it was a real revolution, right? So today it looks for us intuitive. I can use my Visa card, and if I'm traveling to China, to Africa, to the US. But at the time, it was really kind of like a groundbreaking idea, I would say. And since then, Visa has been continuing to put great emphasis on innovation. Visa has continued to obviously to grow as a payment network. And today, Visa really connect and enable commerce all over the world. So we have over 3.2 billion cards globally, around 50 million retail locations. We process $10 trillion every year, about 150 million transactions per day. And I'm not telling you that kind of like to show off how big Visa is. It's just to kind of like show you where Visa is today. And if we look at some of those kind of like changes that I mentioned, the technology, IoT, fintechs, new players, changes in retail regulation. So at Visa, we had to kind of like think how we set ourselves and our stakeholders to that kind of like new payment landscape. And we decided that we need to restretch the edges of our network, of the VisaNet. So one of the first things we did was actually to launch Visa Developer Platform, and you have a fascinating presentation coming up from Rama, so I won't spend too much time on that, but Visa Developer is essentially a set of Visa API capabilities and payments and risk and fraud, data analytics, loyalty, which allows not only like the big players like Google, Facebook, and Amazon to use those, but also early stage startups, fintechs, which want to develop a new proposition to the market. We allow them access to our system through Visa Developer. So innovation is kind of like in the DNA of Visa as a company, and we've launched global innovation centers. So focusing in many cases on areas of kind of like hotbeds for fintechs and startups like San Francisco, Tel Aviv, London, and Berlin. And what we do in those centers is we work closely with our partners, so our bank partners, our retailers, technology companies, startups, and we co-create and we collaborate, and we'll talk about that in a second. What does that mean, co-create with our partners? This is an image that we took from our retail lab innovation lab in Berlin. So this year we've launched a retail experiment lab in Berlin. So the idea was that Berlin would focus on retail propositions. So we also brought in a few startups to kind of like showcase their technologies, and then we brought our retailers to test them and potentially do some POCs with those startups. So this is a company called Memomi, an Israeli company that developed this kind of like smart digital mirror where kind of like our stakeholders could engage and come and work with them. That's also part of the job that we do, work that we do with startup. We bring them to our innovation centers where kind of like our clients can engage and interact with them. So what we do, as I said, in the innovation center is we co-create and collaborate. So the idea is to work closely with our stakeholders, and we take kind of like a design thinking. So that means it's a human-centric approach. So always start from a specific challenge that the partner would like to focus on. So it can be, for instance, a retailer that tells us, listen, I want to better engage with millennials because I see that there's like an upcoming competitor which is doing a great job in that. It can be a bank that wants to resolve for cross-border declines in their payment transactions. Whatever the challenge is, we work closely, very closely with the partner on defining that, and that's kind of like the first phase of our kind of like methodology. So understanding the consumer needs. We also do sometimes market research with our partners in preparation for that. So that's the first step, and mapping the user needs, the pain points. Out of that, we identify the opportunities. So kind of like turning the challenges into real opportunities that our kind of like partners can develop. And from that, we're moving to what we call an ideation and creating solutions. So coming up with ideas on how to deliver those opportunities. We then do kind of like mock-up concepts, kind of like storytelling, storyboards, to bring it to life, the ideas that we have together with our partners. And this is done typically over a session of 2 or 3 days in our innovation centers together with our teams. And the last step, so once we've kind of like did we have the ideas, we mock up the concept, we focus maybe on 1 or 2 ideas from that list, and we map the capabilities that can bring that to life and provide our partners some tools to develop on it. So the idea is that by the end of this co-creation session, there is a blueprint for our partner to do some sort of like a POC within a matter of a few months, using, it can be Visa capabilities, like our APIs, it can be a third-party capabilities, it can be their own partner capabilities, but the idea is that we've equipped the partner with that blueprint in a very kind of like accelerated fashion. So how we work with startups, and so I'm based in Tel Aviv, which you may know is kind of like a hotbed for innovation. So in Israel, over 50% of kind of like the export is actually done from technology companies. So there's like a booming tech sectors. We have about 500, I would say, fintech companies in the markets. But we're also doing similar work in other innovation hubs, whether it's in the Nordics, in Berlin, and in London. So the idea is that we leverage the presence that we have in those innovation hubs to connect the startups to the Visa and I would say the broader ecosystem. So how do we do that? So we focus, I would say, primarily on partnerships and venture investment. So I'm part of a team which is called Digital Partnerships and Ventures, which again, on one hand, kind of like partners with giants, but also wants to engage with the early stage startups. So a partnership can be a commercial opportunity where we see a startup that they can now move payments to Visa cards. It can be an enabling platform to open like new segments. So there's obviously a clear commercial business opportunity that we see with the startups. We also invest in the companies, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. We do POCs with startups, so proof of concept. But the idea is that the POC for us is kind of like a phase in our roadmap of building something more substantial with the startup. So if the POC, we may start with more kind of like a closed, very kind of like technological oriented proof of concept, kind of like in a lab condition. If that works well, we'll probably take it to a pilot with like a live partner, with like an issuer, with a retail, depending on what the tech is. And hopefully if that's successful, then kind of like we can scale and bring that to market. And I think that's a good approach for us. So, since we have the presence in those innovation hubs, we can test new things relatively quickly with the startups. And if that works well, we can basically scale and take it to market. We connect startups to existing Visa programs, so Visa Developer, which we'll talk about in a second, but also other platforms like Visa ID Intelligence, which kind of like plugs in authentication service providers. So every opportunity to create that stickiness and add value to the startups, we're pursuing that as well. We also connect startups to clients. So we have clients which, banks and partners which are visiting our innovation hubs. So we're looking at what the client is focusing on. So we're looking to kind of like focus on, we had a big bank visiting our hub in Tel Aviv a few weeks ago. They focused on machine learning and AI. So we kind of like arranged meetings with like 10, 12 startups for them to meet with the banks. So we're trying to do some sort of like a matchmaking between the bank and the startup, which obviously provides add value to the startup company, because for them, Israel is at best a beta site, but they want to like expand to Europe, to US, to other regions. So that's a great opportunity that we can provide them as Visa with our distribution network through our clients and partners. We sometimes also do joint projects like between Visa, the client, and the startup, like some sort of like a mutual POC, if that makes sense. And trying to add value again to our partners with kind of like the startup angle. Finally, we're working very closely with ecosystem partners. So working closely with venture capital firms, which are more focused on fintech, obviously, and that is for kind of like deal flow perspective. So kind of like they're feeding us with new companies. We provide them feedback on how we see kind of like the companies, because I think in many cases they lack that expertise of understanding fintechs and payment. So it's kind of like a mutual partnership, working with other fintech hubs. So in Israel, there are quite a few banks, international banks, which are operating accelerators in Israel, R&D labs. So partners like Citi, like Barclays, Chase opened an innovation hub. So very collaborative approach of working with those partners as well. We're doing meetups at our kind of like our innovation studio, so engaging with the communities and kind of like adding and driving content and delivering our SME expertise from the studio to the startups. We even host a few startups in our innovation studio in Tel Aviv, and the idea is to bring early stage companies where we see an opportunity for a POC or partnership, let them sit in our space. They're coming to sit with us for a period of 3, 4 to 6 months. And then we can accelerate the projects that we want to do with them. Any questions so far? Okay, cool. We'll also do it in the end. Let's talk about our venture program. So Visa has a global venture investment program. The themes that we kind of like focus on, obviously not surprising. So point of sale solution, B2B. So if you look at consumer payments, they've evolved tremendously in the past 10 years, but I think in B2B there's still a lot of room for innovation and new types of ideas. So B2B is an interesting one. Cybersecurity, which in our world is new ways to authenticate consumers, fraud solutions in the e-com space, mobility, future of retail, which I mentioned, and in IoT. So obviously themes which are close to Visa. We make strategic investments, so we would invest in companies that we partner with. And when you see kind of like some of these players, so some are kind of like on the acceptance, enablement side, like Square, Stripe at the beginning, but then we also invest in platforms like Solaris Bank, like Marqeta, which kind of like can accelerate digital issuance. Behalf is an Israeli company that we invested in, so they provide alternative lending to SMEs. So if you're an SME and you need to buy a lot of supplies from Lenovo, for instance, so you'd go on the Lenovo website and you'll get an offering to get some financing from Behalf, and they do kind of like the underwriting and provide the credit, and they pay directly to the seller, so they don't give the money to the SME. So we did a commercial partnership with Behalf, and we did a venture investment, so it was kind of like a good fit from our perspective earlier this year. And we're looking to really expand our venture programs. We're putting like more people across the hubs and looking for new opportunities. Happy to have some discussion with you after this workshop. And I'll just leave you with this last slide. So again, as part of like Visa's approach to working closely with fintechs, with digital players, we intend to invest up to $100 million in Europe in the next coming years. So I don't have the check ready here with me today, but again, if there's opportunities that we can partner with the startup and help them grow and will be a good fit for Visa, we'll also invest in that company. And I think this is a great initiative by Visa, together with other ideas that you have heard from Vish, like the FinTech Fast Track and other programs in Europe. Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, we could also do it offline after the workshop, so thank you very much. Okay.